We are warmed up, and the topic of our panel is more or less relevant to the previous one, and we start, let's say, immediately. And maybe you already know that global procurement market is assessed about $9 trillion globally. And according to OECD, around 20–25% of this budget is lost due to corruption. Another figure is that out of all foreign bribes, around 60% of the cases are connected to public procurement and getting contract. So you can imagine the scale of the problem and the scale of the challenges we face in public procurement sphere. And in my understanding, the biggest challenge here is a conflict of interest in the decision-making process that leads to inefficient spending of public funds and therefore to the corruption at the very end. And in my humble opinion, the conflict of interest, unfortunately, is embedded into majority of public procurement systems we are dealing with. And let me explain in a few words my statement. Here is the matrix from the famous Milton Friedman. It's about 4 ways of spending money. It's not about public procurement. It's generally about 4 possible, and in fact it's explicit, 4 ways of spending money. And you can see that the situation is quite different whether you spend your own money or you spend others' money. And the ideal and the best situation, according to this matrix, is when someone spends his own money on his own needs. We have perfect situation. He wants to save money, and at the same time he wants to get the best product. The situation slightly changes when he spends his own money on someone else. Still, as the money is his, he takes care about the savings. But as he is buying for someone else, getting the best product is not that high priority. The third point is when you spend someone's money on your own need. In this case, you will seek for the highest quality, but you don't need or you don't seek economy, savings. You may spend a lot, but the priority is high quality. And the fourth and the most unfortunate case is when you spend someone's money on someone's needs. So it's not you don't seek for savings, you don't seek for the best quality. And unfortunately, this is public procurement. And we have to live, and we have to live with this sad reality, and we have to cope problems that are caused by this, I would say, architectural or ideological reasons. This problem is even more complicated by the, again, complicated, lengthy, and vague regulations and procedures. Problem is the absence of the agreed criteria about the quality, agreed specifications. We don't know what to call good, what to call, it's not agreed, let's say. Everyone has its own opinion. Very low competence of all involved parties in the process. I'm not talking about maybe the teams working in the World Banks or in the countries with relevantly high income. I'm talking about the ordinary developing countries, and as a rule in these countries, the level of the salary is extremely low compared to others, and also the level of competence is very low, leading again to inefficient decisions. And last, and in my understanding, not least, but even the most important problem is that the majority of the procurement systems we see around, they are reactive systems. These systems are reacting on the problems that the process has, and they are oriented on sanctions and on punishment. They are not kind of preventive systems providing services or trying to avoid mistakes. And this is one of the biggest problems we face in procurement from the point of corruption. And I see also here our colleagues from Asia, and just recently I've been there and always provide the example of Georgian patrol against post-Soviet GAI. Georgian patrol is moving around with the lights and saying, I'm around, I'm here, don't violate the rules. So everyone can see that he is somewhere around and he is preventing violation. In Kyrgyzstan, for example, or in Kazakhstan, the GAI, this guy, traffic policeman, is hiding in the bushes with the speed gun. And he's looking for the guys who violate the law, and then he is very lucky if he finds someone, because he has to fill his statistics or whatever. So this guy, in contrast to Georgian patrol officer, the post-Soviet or Soviet traffic policeman is interested to have a violation in their system. And exactly the same happens in reactive procurement systems. We have here in Georgia also very good example, very famous teacher and academician Shalva Monashvili. He uses very interesting approach in teaching the kids. Instead of red pencil, when he corrects the work of the people, as a rule, everyone corrects in red and say, you are bad. This is very bad. This is very bad. Instead of red pencil, he is using, or was suggesting to use green pencil. And instead of highlighting the mistakes, he was trying to highlight the good points or good phrases or good solutions students have in their works, and he was trying to inspire the right approach. So we are talking about using green flags instead of red flags in the preventive system compared to the reactive one. And this is the, let's say, starting point that every country has to deal with when starting or doing the procurement reform. And some countries were or are successful in tackling these problems, let's say Georgia, Ukraine, other countries. But in any case, these individual cases, they do not affect the global picture. These are local successes. But based on these local successes, not only these countries, but our colleague Viktor will provide in his presentation more information about open contracting that I'm trying to discuss here as one of the tools to solve such a lot of problems we have in public procurement. And in public procurement, majority of problems also come from the absence of the data and absence of information and doing uninformed decisions. And open contracting based on these best practices provided principles and ideas of standardized description of the data throughout the whole process, starting from the pre-tendering and ending with the post-tendering procedures. And it's not only about data, it's all about principles. And I hope Viktor will provide the essentials of this very important initiative that is very quickly spreading around the world, and I guess every month new and new countries are joining this initiative. As you understood, our panel will be carried like 5-7 minutes presentation with the follow-up questions. I do encourage you to pose questions because the topic is really hot. As a rule, again, I don't know how close are with you with the procurement problems, but as a rule, on the kitchen or somewhere, everyone is talking about tenders, that someone is corrupted, that someone got tendered there, someone got contract, but at the very end, in countries like in Georgia or in other developing countries, we still have to inspire people to pay more attention to the new innovative instruments that emerged thanks to our colleagues presented here. These are all leading anti-corruption experts in their countries focused on public procurement issues, and I hope there will be interesting and fruitful discussion, and at the very end we will come up with some kind of recommendations, best practices that any interested country can use when dealing with public procurement reforms. Viktor, can you start with your
Yes, I can start with my presentation. Can you please turn on? Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank to IDFI for arranging such a great event. And even more, I would like to thank to Georgia for sharing great practices like Tato just described, green flags, practices of prevention. And in fact, Georgian e-procurement system, at least some 7 years ago when Tato and David were leading this reform, was one of the best cases of digitalization and one of the most efficient procurement system worldwide. And we, as, first of all, I'm Ukrainian, as Ukraine, took a lot from Georgia and personally from Tato and David in this regard. And we, as open contracting, also we're lucky to learn from Georgia and from personally Tato and David, so thanks a lot for this experience. And as Tato started from Milton Friedman quadrant, we also learned from them about this. I want to give you more practical example of basically the same quadrant. So, but first of all, we have to understand the scale of the problem. Like $10 trillion annually is spent for public procurement worldwide. So if you will take $100 notes and put it one by one, it will be like going to the moon and back. So it's a huge amount of money, and in fact, we lack transparency and we lack visibility in public procurement. But starting with principles. How money could be spent? Following what Tato has already mentioned, just imagine yourself buying an iPhone or a phone, right? The first quadrant, Tato showed you already, will be buying for yourself for your money. And yesterday was probably the best day to buy a new phone because you had a lot of discounts, and most probably you will wait for such a day to have these discounts, right? Then again, if you're buying something for someone for your money. Yes, as Tato also described, you want to spend less, you are not very concerned about the quality of the product. If you're buying something for yourself for someone's money, you will just buy the top version of the phone in the nearest shop. And if you're buying for someone's money, you don't care about usually quality, about price. And it often happens when you buy something expensive and useless like this Verto phone. So yes, it's public procurement, and it is the first problem I want to highlight. That first of all, we should understand that perception of the money, of public money, as Margaret Thatcher once said that we don't have a budget money or government money. It's our taxes. So we have to perceive all money spent through public procurement as our money. So we have to control this. And we have to teach or to promote this perception on the side of the government, on the side of public procurement specialists. It is super complicated, but it is possible. And we have great evidence from all over the world how these practices are becoming more and more popular, and how procurement specialists, rightly motivated procurement specialists, are treating their company's money or state money as their own and want to get the best value for money, so to shift the situation to the first quadrant. Then, going forward, the second problem is actually professionalism and corruption, or as we have in the name of the forum, the good governance. Another example, a very nice bridge in France. It's a Viaduc de Millau, a bridge with a length almost 3 kilometers, pretty wide, very high, 20 meters higher than Eiffel Tower. And it was constructed during 3 years, and the constructor provided a warranty for 120 years. The cost of this construction was 400 million euros. Do we think that there was some cases of corruption? Most probably yes. but the project was delivered. And now people can use this bridge. Then let's go to Ukraine. Those who were in Ukraine, and Tato and saw this picture, like in one of the nicest districts of our city, we have this situation. It's should be Podilsko-Voskresensky bridge, like with the parameters like pretty close to Viaduct de Millau, a little bit longer but much lower, and the project duration so far is 27 years. So you can imagine that they started construction in 1993, and they promise that they will finish it in 2020. So far, like warranty, we don't have warranty that it will be actually delivered. And so far, the cost of this bridge was 700 million euros. So is it a question of corruption? For sure. Is it a question of professionalism? Yes. Even if it was super corrupted construction, it could not last for 27 years. And it's a huge problem in public procurement. Then it often happens that we don't have professionals who could plan the procurement, who could conduct the procurement, and then deliver the contract. And again, nice Viaduct de Millau, awful bridge in Kiev. And we are coming to the open contracting and open contracting data. So one question to all of you: what do you see in this picture? Just, I don't know, first things, first thoughts, first ideas. A face, okay. Any guesses? Like, not my face. Like, we are in Georgia. Maybe it's Hinkali. Who knows? Like, looks like Hinkali. But in fact, it's let's say quasi-planet now, Pluto. It's a picture what was done in 1994, and now the same planet from 2018. What has changed since that time? Of course, technology has developed, and now we are able to see every particular piece of the last or planet, or who thinks that it's quasi-planet, in our solar system. We know all minerals, we know everything about this planet now. So during time, of course, technologies influences our lives, and in public procurement, we have to be on the edge of technologies. And now we're coming to open contracting data standard, which actually helps us to look at our procurement as we can look now at Pluto in 2019. Several questions like how many liters of milk bought in Tbilisi in 2019? How much money Georgia is spending for gas every year? Or how much money should be spent in November for road construction in the country? What is the difference like in chicken prices all over the country? Well, maybe procurement administrator in Georgian system now could answer you these questions, but most of us, we don't have this information, this data, and we cannot answer this question even in a month, even after spending a lot of time for collecting the information and analyzing the information. So what we're trying to do as an open contracting partnership, we developed an open contracting data standard, which is a publication schema, standardized, which describes how data in public procurement should be recorded and then disclosed to be able to answer the question I raised in a previous slide. So we provide a full record on contracting process starting from planning to implementation. And having this data, we are able to answer such questions. So it's a global non-proprietary standard which reflects the full, complete contracting process. This is data, right? So if we now consider a global procurement system, and yesterday on OGP panel, Tono said that we are now dealing with a global problem, and we have to deal with a global problem with the global solutions. So imagine this is the data of all procurement system worldwide. A huge mess. We are trying to sort this data with open contracting data standard. We are trying to arrange it and then present it visually. So in addition to bringing transparency, like Georgia has a decent level of transparency in public procurement, or Ukraine, I would say that it has one of the most transparent systems worldwide. We disclose everything, but it's only transparency. And then visibility, when you can answer how many liters, what is the price, what is the planned amount of money. Open contracting data standard helps to answer those questions on the global level. Now there are more than 50 countries committed and 30 publishers of OCDS, and we actually can fight again with corruption and improve efficiency, fight with other problems in public procurement thanks to data-driven decisions, and we can develop our policies based on evidences, not on guesses. So why OCDS? Like final thoughts, it's a global standard and it's already providing an open source tools to analyze the data. So if you disclose your procurement data according to OCDS, you can pick some tools from our library developed by OCP or other partners, and then like use it to check for risk indicators or red flags, for some basic KPIs, analysis, and so on. Amazing community, a lot of people dealing with the same problems. You can raise your questions, you can quickly get your answers. And the final things is a common goal. So we want to change the contracting world. We want, let's say, to launch a rocket to Mars as Elon Musk. And we know that it is possible. So once Elon Musk has already launched the rocket and turned it back to the Earth, and there is nothing impossible. Like my favorite motto of US Marines, hard things done at once, impossible takes a little longer. So we are trying to deal with something like impossible, and we are sure that with such a great community, we will be there. Thanks.
Thank you, Viktor. As I understand, and as I saw on the previous panel, we'll have questions from audience on the second part of our presentations. But if you have some immediate urgent questions that are like following in the presentation and you feel that it should be posed, I encourage you to do that. In other case, I will just ask my personal question to Viktor, and then we may proceed to our next panelist. Viktor, it's quite a long time for, it's short time for such a big initiative, but still open contracting is already around for certain years. And based on our, again, Georgian experience in other instances, for example, doing business survey inspired a lot of reforms, not only in Georgia, but in many other countries. Because sometimes when you have a quite a famous and prestigious ranking or surveys, countries tend to get better rankings there. In public procurement, till nowadays, we had just a few, let's say, global rankings. By the way, one of them is developed by the support and involvement of IDFI. Just recently, the World Bank started using the benchmarking of public procurement, and I hope there will be a kind of ranking. But from the point of the World Bank doing business survey, what about open contracting, and whether open contracting has some ranking already, or maybe in the mind to have, just to inspire countries, because that small success really inspires countries, and we have a lot of examples of that.
Yes, so we're trying to inspire countries not by ranking and some kind of competition, but using success stories or impact stories, showing which results you can get using open contracting principles, using open contracting data. And we have great stories from Colombia when just like starting using open contracting principles, the country completely changed their approach to food procurement and providing meals for schools for children, saving to 22 million per year and increasing competition, imagine from 14 bidders to 52. So it's amazing results. And as regard competition, I personally always promote IDFI transparent public procurement rating, and we will have a separate panel after the lunch. I believe that it's a great tool to persuade countries to improve themselves in terms of, first of all, legislation, and I hope that we will be able to expand the rating by including some open contracting indicators there.
Yeah, I hope so. That if we will manage to get that, it will be great. If this will be a new sport for this rating, and also, again, I'm pretty sure that a lot of countries will immediately start reform just to hit the top. Now we will switch to that best practices Viktor was just mentioning, and as I mentioned, here we have leading experts in their respective countries or institutions, and I hope this experience will be very interesting for you and for any decision maker or any interested person dealing with public procurement reform and especially civil engagement in monitoring processes. Gabriel Šípoš is, as I mentioned, leading anti-corruption expert in Slovakia. He is involved in this process for a long period of time. I do remember we even met in 2000, it was 2010, and yeah, and by the time Slovakian exam was, I guess, just a few out of good practices. By the time, I guess there was no any. That the country was publishing just maybe not the full, but still some portion of the data that allowed you to start your activities. But sometimes countries are very cooperative, governments are cooperative, and again, we have a few countries example. In majority of cases, governments are not very cooperative in such cases, and we will see examples from different countries when sometimes governments are cooperative, sometimes not. So what is your experience in that regard?
Thank you, Tato. Hello, everybody. Yes, Slovakia, I think it's, again, a little bit interesting for everybody because we started a long time ago, and we didn't really start with the public procurement only, but what's unique about Slovakia, I think it's still probably the only country that does that in such a wide way, is that since 2011 Slovakia started requiring that every public body, every single public body, before they spend a single euro, they need to publish the contract online in full text. Only the day after it's published, you can actually start spending the money, and it's from anything, from small things to big things, right? Not just procurement and so on. But how do we get there? Just let me give you the story. Yeah, you see the boring notice board. Rankings help, but scandals help even more. I think in Slovakia certainly it did. So this is a picture of a notice board in one of the ministries, and the scandal started by putting up a small piece of paper announcing a tender for consulting services from the EU money for some 120 million euros. This was not announced even back, this was 2007, so not even in some national newspapers, not even on internet. It was just on such a notice board. And of course, what happened is that I think 3 companies pretty much, in agreement, they submitted their bids, and the winner was a group that was very close to the minister. So that was a big scandal, and it only leaked out after half a year after this happens. Already, I think close to 50 million euros was spent, and it leaked out of the ministry, and the media got on it. It was a big scandal. Minister had to resign and so on. And these are the two ministers, one after another, one who resigned and another one who followed, who also resigned because he was helping him with the tender. The good part of the story, it's called Notice Board Tender Story. It's quite famous in Slovakia. Also because it's the only two ministers in Slovakia who went to jail for something like this for 9 and 11 years. They only went to jail last year, so it took more than 10 years actually to get them sentenced. But they are the only two ministers who ended up in jail in Slovakia. That's another story about the lack of prosecution. But anyway, this again happened in 2007, and the next government actually said, okay, enough of this. We cannot learn about scandals from leaks and from media. So they approved the law that I just mentioned, right? That we're not gonna, wait for somebody to tell us what's happening. We need to see the contracts before we actually start spending money. So this is what happened in 2011. Again, it's full text, so it's out there online. I think there's a picture of it. Yeah, this is called Center Contract Register. So it's like at the airport, or at the bus station, you see, whatever's coming. So every single public institution is uploading it in real time, and when you sit and just reload this page, you'll see up in new contracts, and you click on it and you see the full text. Again, it's not just procurement. It's loans, it's grants, it's rents, whatever. Sometimes it's of course not spending money. It's just some public institutions renting a square for somebody. So it's nominally it's for free, but there's a contract that you have to publish, right? Okay. Again, for me, open contracting is not just contracts, and it's not even just procurement, but there's a whole lot of other things. From 2012, Slovakia started publishing the full, basically all the documents from the public procurement. So it's from announcements to all the procedural documents. When you kick out some company for some reason, that has to be there with the explanation. Then all the bids are coming. You see all the bidders' names, all their offers, and finally you see why somebody won. There's a document saying, okay, these were the criteria. That's why somebody won. And then you have the full contract. As I said already, so everything's out there. From 2014, the tax office is of course collecting all the tax records from all the companies, so in the individuals as well, but the ones from the companies from 2014 are being published. So every single company registered in Slovakia that files for taxes, you can get their records, the annual accounts. So see how much they're making, how much taxes they're paying, how many employees, who is their accountant, and so on. So all of this is published also online. So that's really helpful. For instance, if you're checking who are the bidders, you're looking at the bidders, and is it the companies that are actually doing the business, or they just started, or are they connected to some politician? You can find out through those. And of course, the beneficial ownership register, whoever was here yesterday, I mentioned that from 2015, we also made it public, beneficial ownership register for companies who are doing business with the government. So if you're doing some research, you complement all of these, and the others, of course, but these are the main ones that help you monitor what's happening. Okay, this is the website. This is from one of the cities. This is the website of one of the cities. When the law, when I said the law requires all the contracts to be published, so of course sometimes you spend money without the contract, right? If it's small, buying flowers or buying small things, basically, refreshments, whatever. So you basically get a receipt, but you don't have a contract, right? Even those have to be published. So basically we have the whole cash flow. And the way it's published, the central contract register has it for all the national institutions, but for all the local ones, which could be cities, city-owned companies, schools, prisons, social care institutions, anything that's actually public, owned by public or the local institutions, they have to publish all their, again, contracts, receipts, and even orders. So whatever they order, you can kind of follow that cash flow. So again, this is very similar table, like from the National Contract Register, where you see, what they're spending on. You click on it, and you see actually what is it, what that your city is buying. Especially on the local level, it seems like, of course, the National Register is more for media and for NGOs. Maybe from competitors, also companies. But these local ones, it's something that engages citizens a lot more. So lots of the local media pick up on these stories, what your mayor is paying for the local park, or even for the, all these mayors, all these local municipalities like to have all sorts of art or music parties, and they invite all sorts of celebrities for those, for holidays, or all that, and you would be able to track, actually. So there were a lot of people that were really curious, why we're spending, I don't know, 50,000 for a famous singer to come over for 2 hours. Is this a good value for money for our small municipality? Of course, it looks, it makes the mayors look good, and but so that they like to spend on that, but citizens don't see it that way. So there's a lot of pickup of the even smaller sum, actually, not necessarily the big contracts from the local media. Okay, the impact. I'm always interested in impact. I love to promote transparency, but I think it's a fair question. What does it cost? So we did a separate impact study, by the way. It's on our website about more costs, but there's a few things that I took from that study. Surprisingly, a lot of people actually check on the data. Again, it's a few clicks. You can go to your city, your village, whatever, your institutions, university, and you can check what they're spending on, right? So we carried, I think, every second year a national-wide poll, do you know about this law, and have you checked something online? So surprisingly, 8% of people said yes. That's quite a bit, for me. I didn't expect it that way. We also asked, actually, how many people ask for information through Freedom of Information requests. That's like closer to 1-2%. Of course, and you can ask it through email, right? And you would think that's easy, so people should use that. But actually, something coming on you online, it's always more accessible than just having to find the address and write and ask for it. So I think that's the difference. If the transparency is automatic, not something you demand, it's much better. And of course, you don't have to know what you're looking for if things are online. You need to know, of course, if you're looking for what kind of institutions, what kind of contracts. But if you don't know, that something's being spent, you can ask for it directly. A lot more media picking up stories about procurement. Yeah, I think we asked about procurement, so 25% more coverage of that. So we now know a lot more about where the money is going. And back in 2010, more than half of procurement was actually ended up with a single bid. Just within 3 years of all these reforms, it was cut to half. So now it's about 30%. I think EU number is just below 20%. So of course, some purchases, there's not much competition there. But yeah, it seemed like it encouraged competition, more transparency, and also all these reforms. One of those was for a while we had mandatory auctions, right? So not just you collect the bids, but then there was electronic auction. Could you improve on your bids? That was also something that Slovakia has introduced. A few of my recommendations from all these all this research and studies. Of course, data standards very important. We continually check, if those contracts appear there and so on. One of the things we're fighting, for instance, is state-owned companies don't like to publish some contracts that they argue that it hurts them in the fight, in the competition fight. There is, of course, something to it, but the other side of it is transparency, right? If you don't see what you're doing, do we trust you actually to sign good contracts? So, for instance, the capital Bratislava's airport, state-owned airport, doesn't want to publish the contracts that they have with the airline companies. So we asked for Ryanair, for instance, trying to see if there's some sort of subsidy that would be, as in other countries, that they found out that Ryanair gets subsidized a lot, and it seems to be breaking the competition rules. We couldn't get that contract yet. But also, yeah, some of the data, of course, sometimes are missing or false. The data comes from these procurement entities. So if they submit stuff that's wrong, that it ends up in all the analysis. We believe more data could be again helpful. Land registry would be some of the stuff again that we'd love to see. Now in Slovakia you do have access, so it's a bit complicated, but basically there's a map and you can check, so on the street just next to the hotel, on the land below this hotel in Slovakia, in 1 or 2 minutes you can find out who owns these, all the land in Slovakia, right? But it doesn't have the interface that you could collect the data in bulk and reuse it with the others. So that's something we're pushing for. And research, I think research is really, really important. So when you have all this contract transparency, that's great, but how do you find that something's wrong, right? I mean, yes, just 1 more minute, sorry. Research is important, so you basically need to somehow come down to some unit prices, right? Because almost no contract is the same, So always the car is a bit different, the computer is a bit different. You want to compare the same and see if it's a good value for money or not. So we did a number of that. This is just a chart saying, it's from the Slovak study. We looked at all the district cities in Slovakia for a simple thing like printing toners. All these offices need those. And so we said, okay, let's have a look all across the Slovakia, and we found huge differences in prices, not justified by the bulk they're buying or by the special services or whatever. It's just the same type of thing, huge differences. It's not that in the capital it's more expensive as you would expect than maybe in the poor area. No, it didn't make any sense, right? So clearly to us it was showing either corruption or incompetence in purchases. And we did that for many, many things. And the final study that I'll finish with, we said, okay, let's take a different look at it. So we looked at the companies' annual results. I mentioned those are published, and we looked at the companies who do business with the state, and with the ones who don't do the state business, who don't have big government contracts. So we compared those two groups, and we found out that the ones who do business with the government are more profitable. Which I'm not terribly happy about, right? So I would think that if the government is paying attention, to what they're buying, they would be more or less the same type of profitability. We checked different sectors, and for instance, last panel was about energy sector. So energy sector in Slovakia, the one that does business with the government is extremely profitable. Especially there was lots of solar and wind power and all those contracts that the government was giving out and subsidies and so on. they're way too profitable. And there was also stories about corruption. So there was one way to find out that I don't think we want the companies who do business with the government to be extra profitable. Right, again, yeah, I don't think you see all these links, but here's a links, yeah, if you want to, please get back to me, there's links to all the registers that we have in Slovakia. Right, yeah, so I hope that was a little bit helpful to you. Again, overall, it certainly has great value. I would urge you not to think of open contracting just for procurement, but for anything else. There's all sorts of benefits from looking at that. Once you only focus on small part, I think corruption will tend to move to the others. And of course, procurement also has some thresholds, right? So there's lots of stuff below that. So I think once we think about that, it helps us have a better hold of what's going on in a country. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gabriel, for presentation. It was really interesting, especially your remark about the profitability of the government contractors. It's really interesting point and deserves to be coped. As we mentioned, open contracting and switching to open contracting data standard is great, but data without instruments is just data. And we will see from the example of our colleagues now from Vivien Cortez from Philippines. We'll see what kind of instruments they use in Philippines to fight corruption in public procurement in Philippines. Please.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say before moving forward with the presentation is that our procurement law was passed in the Philippines in 2003. So we're actually nearing 20 years of implementation. And with that, we have also established an electronic procurement portal. And since it was established in 2003, it also means that there's a lot of things that have to be done in order to modernize it. And our story right now in the Philippines is that we, as Hivos, are supporting several organizations. And this is just one story which I would like to highlight in terms of how we can investigate contracts through the use of open contracting data. So I think we've already established early on that when we talk about the public contracting process, it's normally complex and just really difficult to understand. More so if you consider yourself as an ordinary citizen, not as a public procurement expert. So this is one of the primary reasons why Hivos has decided to support the work of journalists, civil society organizations, and other intermediaries because we believe that they play a very important role in terms of analyzing, contextualizing, and translating information into tangible and relevant information for citizens and government as well. Because right now, there really is a focus in terms of evidence-based policy advocacy. We have been working very closely with the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism since 2017. They are an independent, globally recognized, and respected nonprofit media entity that specializes in investigative reporting. You could say that they were actually one of the core organizations that started investigative journalism in the Philippines. And when we started working with them, the project was designed to help journalists increase knowledge and skills in reporting government contracts, thus helping to create and sustain a culture for investigating contracts using the open contracting lens. At the end of the day, what we really wanted was to make sure that we would be able to influence decision makers to take action on anomalies and irregularities found in government contracts as reported by journalists. The next is we want uptake. Uptake in terms of how citizens will also not only be informed, but would also take action. Because at the end of the day, it is the taxpayers' money being spent by government. So there were three major outputs. The first one was actually just looking into whether or not government contracts were easily accessible. And of course, no surprise, we found out that they were not. They were not even published according to open data standards. Hence, what we wanted to do was to prove a point in terms of how important it was to get all data points needed when you look at contracts, but not only examining contracts in itself, but also trying to weave through the whole process from planning to implementation, even up until assessment or knowing whether or not you have achieved value for money. The first series that they did was on the Build, Build, Build program of the president. This was focused on big ticket infrastructure projects. And the government basically allocated more than 69 billion US dollars for the next 3 years, ending in 2022. So given this, we wanted to see how exactly were the programs being implemented. So they took a deep dive into several contracts. And by September 2018, they were able to publish 5 main reports in 3 sidebars. And unfortunately, they uncovered massive delays, questionable contractors, and inefficiencies within the main implementing partner, the Department of Public Works and Highways. So the reports that they drafted were syndicated to major news organizations, of which a total of 27 stories were republished by 7 online outfits. What's more interesting is that after the media outfits saw how valuable the investigative reports were, they actually went forward and published 39 of their own follow-up stories. So there really is interest in terms of how you would want to look at contracts. So here are some of the examples that they did. They highlighted corruption, politics, and slippage in projects. They also found out that the top 10 contractors in Build, Build, Build programs actually had a record of fraud and delays. Most of them were actually already blacklisted by government. And then this one was actually something they did not expect. They, in terms of being able to identify contractors and subcontractors, found out that there was this subcontractor who was employed by almost all major contractors in one major city. But then, this subcontractor was not finishing projects on time. So I guess this ticked off something in them, and they realized that there was something wrong. So they dug deeper, only to find out that the father of this subcontractor, the firm's owner, was actually the father of then Special Assistant Bongo, and who is now currently also a senator who won in the midterm elections. Next was election procurement. We had our midterm elections in May 2019, this year, and there were a lot of problems in terms of technical difficulties, paper jams, malfunctioning machines, even SD cards that were really not usable at all. So they were also able to publish a 5-part series. And in doing so, they worked together with the Commission on Elections. And they were able to unearth that, again, a lot of massive delays and very wasteful spending on the part of the Commission on Elections. And this actually had a very negative impact when you look at how the elections were planned. So at the end of the day, they were able to have 15 follow-up stories from different news organizations as well, based from the initial reports that they drafted. And here are some of what they've highlighted. They found out that 6 in 10 machines to verify voters were actually not used at all. It was unusable. 4,650 SD cards were corrupted, therefore not used again. 16 million people were not able to vote for party list representatives just because the names of these party list representatives were not printed at the back of the ballot. And then, of course, you've got the electoral machines. A lot of them were actually not used at all. So, having said this, they were just not looking into contracts, but they were looking at the whole procurement process, which basically paved the way for them to tell all of these stories. And some of the lessons that they have shared to us is that it's very important to understand the contracting process. You need to know how it goes from planning up until implementation, because that's the only way for you to be able to identify red flags. How contractors do it, how corrupt government officials do it. However, it's also important to note that a red flag does not always mean corruption, but it can be a point of investigation. And then, of course, if you are a reporter, which I am not, but I am from civil society, and I think that some of their tips are also quite useful for us in terms of being able to monitor procurement, it's important to learn the system, learn the tricks of the trade. How are they actually doing what they do, trying to circumvent the procurement process? Because if you look at it, the Philippine procurement law is really a very good law. It was drafted as an anti-corruption law. But then, of course, if there's a will, there's a way. And then the second one is that if you're a reporter and you get the tip, sometimes it's easy for us to get excited. Even in civil society, when we hear something going wrong, we get excited. We want to do something about it. But what's important is we have to rein in our emotions. Try not to get excited. Instead, get busy. Look at the documents. Get your hands dirty with the data, with the documents. Make sure you get the details. The next is, when you deal with data, you have to know the strengths and limits of the data. What do you have? What is missing? Because you also need to cross-check several databases. In the Philippines, we still are in the way of having an OCDS-compliant e-procurement system. Fingers crossed that it's going to happen within the next 2 years. So if you look at the different government websites, data is scattered. Data is published in different formats, mostly PDF. Mostly JPEG also. PDF, JPEG, they say it's PDF, but basically bottom line is it's not machine readable. And then you need to compare and contrast, look for patterns. But more importantly, also look for outliers, because that is what happened when they identified that one of the subcontractors belonged to the father of Bongo. And then go micro, but go macro as well. And I think what is also critical is that you just don't rely on data. Go to the field, ground truth your data, make sure it holds. And the last one is that try not to leave any stone unturned. There should be no surprises at the very least. Try to be as transparent as you are when you write your stories and focus on the consequences. When we talk about the consequences, these are basically the things that affect the lives of the readers, of the people, of the taxpayers. You're not just reporting on something that has been done wrong, but what you would want to do is to make sure that the reader understands how it affects them, so that they would be prompted to do something about it. So if the presentation is shared, there are also links here. So you could just click on them and see how some of the things that we've been doing help in terms of moving forward advocacy of using open contracting in public procurement. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivien. I'm pretty sure that when our journalists and NGOs will start using open data to monitor public procurement in Georgia, they will really use your tips and tricks. Yeah. I have one question before I proceed to our colleagues. I have just one very short remark and question and observation. Here in Georgia, it's my personal observation confirmed by figures, but during the election cycles, in the years, we always have the decline of competitive procedures. Yes. Do you observe such a thing in your country or in your? So when you have election is disaster from the point of public procurement. This is my personal understanding. So.
Yeah. Well, every time there is an election in the Philippines, we do see that there is less competition in bids happening, mainly because there are more negotiated contracts, alternative modes of bidding that provide lesser, or rather, that provide more discretion to government officials to enter into contracts. It doesn't actually help that our president is not so much in favor of the procurement law. In fact, he has attacked it a lot. And he has also introduced alternate, how do I say this? An executive order that encourages the use of alternative modes of procurement. So it's actually a struggle right now in the Philippines for us to make sure that the current procurement law has, is upheld.
Thank you. We have a lot of monitoring methodologies around in the world, and it's hard to say which one is better. In my understanding, the better is one that is working. And as we know, in Hungary, we have quite an interesting monitoring methodology that is working for quite a long period of time. And we have its, like, how to say, founder or father of that system, Sandor Lederer, and he will provide his personal experience how they are dealing with such a complicated topic, what kind of methodology they are using, and what trends are they observing in this regard. Thank you.
Does it work? But now it works. Okay. Hello, and thank you for having me. And just to say that when we started working on procurements quite some time ago, and way before we did this tool, those procurement reforms you had here in Georgia and the website where you could access procurement data in a very transparent and machine-readable way was a big inspiration for us that, I mean, why don't we have it in our country as well? And of course, there were certain improvements, but the basic need for this tool, or the basic reason why we started to work on the red flags tool, was because our government never really decided to improve the publication and monitoring of public procurement significantly. Nor did this happen in the European Union. The European Commission spent an enormous amount of money on developing a tool which is called Arachne. It's a quite interesting tool in a way that it uses plenty of databases to detect fraud in procurements and EU projects, EU development funds done, but its use is not mandatory, and the tool itself is absolutely not open, so you know that it exists, but not a single outsider, meaning anyone who is not member of the European Commission's administration or a member state has ever seen this tool really working and data published. And you know, in Hungary, we as an NGO were always working on how we can first of all make things transparent, as you know, the baseline for doing any investigation or advocacy is you need to know what's going on. And we always, we always had a deficiency of institutions that fight corruption. We very much are relying on journalists doing these jobs instead of the authorities. So the whole idea of developing a procurement monitoring tool came from the need that we need to support those journalists who normally would need to browse through hundreds of documents every day to find the ones that's worth investigating, And then we came up with this idea of doing red flags, doing an algorithmic system that tells you at least probably you should check out these procurements. They might be risky. It doesn't tell you that they're corrupt for sure, but they tell you that it's worth looking at it. And another important thing for us was that we tried to focus on the prevention side, meaning focus on procurement calls the moment when a procurement is announced, but there is no contract yet. So hopefully by raising awareness, highlighting problems, you can prevent bad contracts to be signed. So the tool is a actually a very simple thing. We developed altogether 40 algorithms of corruption risks. They are sometimes breaches of law, often just indicating loopholes, bad practices. And 32 out of the indicators are focusing, as I said, on the procurement cause, and the rest is focusing on the contract award notices or the connection between the two. And you can see a short screenshot from the site where procurements have a lot of flags. So you see these flags. You can also in the search tool, of course, select the kinds of risk you're interested in. You can look up a certain company. You can also subscribe if you're a journalist and you're interested in types of procurements, let's say in IT sector, or you're always working on a certain amount of companies that are, let's say, connected to the government. You get these notifications, so you don't even have to go to the website. But if you go every morning or whenever you want on the website, you see the freshest documents that appear and the flags that were given to these. And of course, if you click on one of them, you get the explanation, what these flags mean and what kind of risk it shows. And of course, you see the whole document family. So if it's the contract award notice, you can see how the whole procedure started. I won't go into details because there's going to be a workshop after lunch where I can tell more about this. So if you're interested, then please join. It also allows some kind of, analysis of data. However, this is not a tool to build a corruption index. So simply if an organization has many flags or a tender has many flags doesn't mean that, it's much more corrupt than another one. But we made an interesting experiment in seeing whether there are correlations of certain government entities' procurements in different sectors. So let's say road construction, or transportation, or energy trade. And we could clearly see, you see it in the size of the bubbles, that there are patterns in which certain companies manipulate tenders regularly. And this tool is quite widely used by the press. So these are some screenshots from online articles that are based on this tool. And that depends really on your luck and politics and so on, how much these cases are then investigated or taken further. But we see that for journalists, it's really an important and beneficial tool to work on. And it's completely open source, so the source code is published and can be used by anyone. It was developed, so we were, as Tato said, the fathers or mothers of the project, but we did it in cooperation with Transparency International Hungary and an IT company. And since, I wanted, this is not our project, but I wanted to show a very different approach where how you can deal with this problem as well. This is a Czech group, or Czech initiative called Zindex, where they have a similar approach of monitoring, but what they do is much more ranking. And what they do is, opposing what we do as starting with the preventive part and mainly highlighting the problems, they rank procuring entities regarding who is best in publication of data and doing competitive procedures. So you can check out cities or government institutions and see who is best. And they, of course, before publishing their annual results, always give these results first to the cities or the entities and explaining how they could improve. So this is, in fact, this more green light approach of dealing with this problem. But of course, for this, you need to have already the whole span of the procurement cycle. So I just wanted to show it as another method or contrast of how you can do it. And currently, we're working on a project called Record, where we do it in Poland, Romania, and Spain, besides of Hungary, where we go. I didn't mention it, but the Red Flags project is on for EU level procurements, and this project has a different approach because it goes into below the threshold spending. So this was just a little introduction of, you know, civil society approaches when the government is not on your side in this project. And as said in the workshop, we can discuss it furthermore. Thanks.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and especially that one about Zindex. I will cope because it's green pencil or green flag approach sometimes produce really good results. And before I will proceed to our final presentation, where we will have a big picture, I will have one, again, a short question for you. You already mentioned two methodologies, and we also know that there are dozens of good procurement monitoring methodologies and software around. Some of them are also open source, some of them are proprietary, but in any case, we already have a lot of, let's say, different red flags or green flags. Can you imagine something like a library of the red flags, just to aggregate the knowledge and aggregate the experience of different end users of the system? Because, yeah, maybe from one point, Zindex is good, red flags is good, something is good used in Ukraine or maybe in Georgia, but these are, again, just pieces of and the local picture. What do you think? Can you imagine that in very short period we will have a library of the red flag, especially taking into account that very soon, I hope, all countries will switch to OCDS, and then comparison of the countries will be very technical undertaking.
Yes, absolutely. So we started a collection actually of such indicators 1 or 2 years ago. So it's even a website. It's called Indicator Toolbox, where we collected each and every indicator used by certain projects. We have Prozoro, we have DigiVist, we have indicators from the World Bank, so very different types of projects that work on that. And what I think OCDS is very important to make this data comparable and tools interoperable, but you will never be completely able to solve the issue that for every country you have different corruption practices and issues. So let's say probably certain indicators that make sense in Hungary would be not applicable in Georgia because they do different schemes of corruption here, or they have different loopholes in the system, and the other way around, some things just don't appear in Hungary. So I think you cannot fully automatize the working of this system, but you can make it much more interoperable and much more, adaptable if you follow these standards and collect the knowledge like in such databases.
May So actually, Sandor and the team did a really great job to collect all the methodologies on their platform, as he mentioned, and we already have a good example of, let's say, reuse of this methodology. Guys from Chile actually looked through the whole set of all different methodologies and picked those indicators from the whole library which actually suits Chilean realities most. And that's the value of having this thing what is Sandor now doing, because for sure, like having structured data, described indicators, and formulas how to calculate these indicators using, for example, OCDS data will not be applicable everywhere, but then you can pick out of the menu what will work in your context.
Our next presenter, Isabelle Adam, works for Government Transparency Institute. She is also dealing with different initiatives related to public procurement transparency, and she will provide us a big picture how to use big data to fight and combat corruption in public procurement.
Thank you. I also have a presentation. Yes, okay. I don't know if it's really the big picture, but I will definitely talk about one instrument that we can use to analyze corruption risks. And it's actually conceptually quite similar to what we already heard, using like risk indicators. And what we are trying to do is to take it even further and use different types of big data analytics, use statistical methods, like statistical prediction, network analysis, etc. So yeah, just to explain the underlying logic. As we heard already, everything is about data now. More and more information are becoming public and are published in, well, hopefully in analyzable format. And we can try to use all these amounts of data, put it together, and analyze it. In order also to add to other kinds of indicators that we already have. So the kinds of data that we use, obviously public procurement data. For example, as we saw the Slovakian website, if it's published in such a structured way, we can develop an algorithm to scrape this information and put it into a data set. Or we already have downloadable data available in many countries. What's also really useful to have is beneficial ownership data, or information on politicians' accounts, or performance of public organizations, or even like different legal cases. And ideally, we can connect these different data sources to get a bigger picture, and then use different types of big data analytics. Just to, I think it's probably already clear, but just to be clear that what's the understanding of corruption in public procurement, we try to use a really simple definition that the goal is to steer a certain public contract to a pre-selected company, a favored bidder. And in this sense, there can be a corruption rent extracted by either overpricing or delivering lower quantity or quality than on a competitive market. How can you steer a contract? You can either try to limit competition, for example, by using a non-open procedure type or by having a very short bid submission period. You can tailor the evaluation criteria to a certain company. You can modify the conditions of the contract afterwards. So there are all these kind of methods that can be used to steer a contract to a certain company. And this is what we basically use in the measurement model. It's very similar to the red flags that were already mentioned, but just to be clear, this is the concept of the corrupt network in public procurement, where you have the contract, the public body, the supplier company, and they are somehow connected by an invisible tie. It can be family relations or employment or political donations. And these are the different elements of a corrupt network in public procurement. And from these four elements, there can be different indicators based on that. So we can look at risk indicators from the contracting process. If we have good procurement data, we can look at political connections. If we have, for example, political donations data, we can look at beneficial ownership if we have those. And if we have evaluations of contracting bodies, these can also give rise to certain red flags. So yeah, just to have an overview of all the kinds of red flags that are possible. And then we can, based on the data available, we can compile and measure and calculate as many as possible, and then use statistical methods to validate them against each other, to see to what degree they can predict corruption risks. We can also use it to do a network analysis of bidders that are colluding, for example, all these different kinds of methods. So yeah, as I already said, these are the things you can use it for. You can assess risks at different levels. You can use it for formulating policy advice. For example, if we compare after a certain transparency policy was passed, whether it changes the corruption risks, we can have automatic compliance checks to see whether public buyers actually comply with the procurement rules. Just to show a few examples, for example, this is the corruption risk index that we built for Peru, for all the public buyers based on the data. And what is interesting for us to look at are those on the right-hand side, on the right tail, because these are the public buyers that, out of the 6 red flags that we could calculate, in the tenders that they conduct, on average they have 5 of these red flags present. So these are probably those organizations that you would want to look at more closely and maybe have a different, tighter control framework. What we can also do, for example, is disaggregate by different sectors or even subsectors to see that even within infrastructure there are big differences, whether we look at airport construction in the EU or road construction, there are different levels of risk. We can zoom in and not just compare countries or sectors, but different regions within countries, which can be interesting because countries are not homogeneous, so they can be very diverse within. Or we can use these type of analytics to compare governance quality over time and see different changes in different regions. So just some examples of the types of statistics that we can do if we have good quality data available, and hopefully it will become more and more. I mean, actually in many countries we already have a lot of data being published, and it's becoming more and more with e-procurement system, open contracting portals, with data standards. So this is one of the options, one of the inspirations. Also, it's always good to invest more into national systems to really compile data in a structured way, in a machine-readable way, in a way that we can use for analysis. And this is also something that many international donors are starting to do more and more. So, for example, we are working with the World Bank in Bangladesh on this. Yeah, just to give a few examples. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we proceed to the questions from the audience and then final remarks, I have one short question to you. You mentioned big data, and of course, processing of big data requires big money. A good example, for example, again, is Prozoro. In Prozoro, we have state-of-art software to process the data, open contracting data, and in fact, that software really, I don't know, played very significant role in promoting Prozoro, to be honest. At the same time, that software was donated to Ukraine by very good people. In any other case, it's several $1,000s worth software. So what do you think, and what do you advise countries, or what kind of software they may look for, whether there is available somewhere open source monitoring software or something that may deal with the big data? Because in any other case, the game of playing with big data is the luxury of the big guys, but not the journalists, not the NGOs, small NGOs, local and stuff like that. So where is the solution?
We're actually working on an open software at the moment, just starting with Uganda and Jamaica, together with the DFID. So I think there's an understanding that we need to have more open software for big data analysis, because as you said, otherwise it's too expensive, and then it stays within closed circles, and in the end no one benefits, and that's not the purpose. But I think, I mean, it's still in the beginning of being developed more and more, and it also depends a lot on country specifics. But I think there's a move, and there's also an understanding from the donor community that we need to have portals where we compare different countries and where all different countries that have data available can participate.
I would also like to contribute. In Ukraine, you mentioned business intelligence, which was provided by a ClickTech company. Like now there are three top providers of business intelligence solutions. It's Microsoft Power BI, it's Tableau, French company, and ClickTech. So business intelligence, for the moment, I believe, could not be replaced by any kind of like specifically developed software, because business intelligence like engine and the concept of, for example, Click work when they calculate the data in operational memory and provide you like a really fast like dashboards, and you can drill into the smallest details of the big picture. It's very important, and I cannot say that it is replaceable but by any kind of open source solution for the moment. Of course, I believe that we have to invest in this. Most of open source solution can provide you...
To buy together.
Yeah, so most of open source solution can provide you like some basic statistics, but if you want to understand the bigger picture and to go into the like small details, I believe that countries have to understand that they have to invest into such tools. If we look at Ukraine, the cost of the tool, like licenses plus development, of course it was a contribution, but overall it was something like $600,000. Like the cost of licenses was $450,000, which was provided free of charge by Click, and then development of the tool itself. And the annual support now costs something like $40,000. But when your public procurement market is close to $40 billion per year, and the like details and risks you can detect using this software, of course it pays off. And now business intelligences like Ukrainian one are available in Moldova, in Kyrgyz Republic, in Kazakhstan already. So countries are trying to develop similar tools for themselves. It is just important to have similar tools available for civil society. And the value of Ukrainian tools and this donor's contribution, that the tool is public, so everyone can use it. In those government I've just mentioned in countries, it's available only for government institutions. And of course, sometimes it could cause some problems.
Thank you, Viktor, for clarification. I encourage the audience to pose the questions. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very inspired by all these examples and all the implemented public procurement databases, etc. So that's really good to hear. We're lagging a little bit behind in Norway, but the interest we have seen on public procurements comes from the municipality level. So we now have the capital, Oslo. They have how do you say, the mayor or the steering parties, they have agreed to consider demanding beneficial ownership from public procurements. So, but also on considering demanding country by country information from the companies, so that they need to show how much the company structure globally and how much they are earning and taxing. So it's an instrument to see if any profit shifting is going on. So my question is, does anyone in the panel have an experience on or examples on this profit shifting side of the public procurement companies, either locally or on a municipality level? Has this been something that has been, been one of the factors that you have been looking for, or red flags, or analyzed, or in any way? Thank you.
Yeah, looks like.
I think we're looking for it, but usually we don't have the right data available. Yeah, but it's a really important point to look for.
Please.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting for me, and I think the panel that we have planned was really interesting, not only for me, but for the audience. We have the amazing presentations and presentations of the existing practice. I would like, if you can just very shortly and briefly comment what can be the future of improvement in public procurement, of the existing achievements. You spoke about the technological achievements, how it is developing and how it can be developed. I mean, the public procurement to better respond to the challenges that exist in public procurement.
Yeah, I would add two things quickly. I think from the whole procurement process, we know by now quite a lot of things about the phase when you announce procurement and the contracting. So there, quite a lot of information is made available by some countries, and it's very much explored what kind of corruption risks arise. Maybe I think one type of data that is not connected yet at many places but would be very important is the actual spending data. So because it's not only about the contract, but then you have this loop seeing how much they actually give to contractors. But I think two phases of the procurement process are not really covered. One is the planning phase. Do we actually need that bridge? You don't know how many of these decisions were taken, whether we just should spend money on something. You just come into the picture when the decision was made. And the whole transparent and participatory part of making decisions where money is going to be spent is for me one phase where much of work has to be done yet. And the other part is the end of the cycle. A procurement was done. How do we know whether it made sense? How do we know whether actually, it met all the expectations we had? Is it calculated that within the life cycle of a product or an investment, you got the returns you were hoping for at the beginning? So I think for me, these are the two areas of procurement which I found are much less explored than needed, and where I would love to, engage more. And I think this could make the whole procurement cycle better.
Sorry, may I just add, because I absolutely agree with Sandor. Just wanted to give you short examples. The planning, exactly. I'm finding that the more transparent procurement is, the less you basically see of corruption in there. So there's at least the data show you there's enough competition. They announce it to everybody and so on. So technically, you see things are okay, because sometimes they arrange the other companies to submit a bid, so it looks like there's competition, but actually they agreed that the others are submitting really high bids and stuff like that. So the scheming, once they see things will be seen, they're trying to do something about it. So I think really sometimes corruption is really that they're buying stuff they don't need, but technically it looks like it was at the market price and so on. So that's very important. And what happened in Slovakia with all this data coming out in the last 5 years, the government setting up so-called value for money researchers. So almost every ministry has this unit, and above some value, pretty much all the purchases of the ministry, but all the institutions below it have to take out this analysis. So first you need to basically show the justification for it. So it kind of goes to ministry, they have a look at it. So this is very important, these units that are doing a great job. And then the phase after it's what we tried in Slovakia is now it's mandatory. Once you do the purchase, you need to grade the contractor. Right? Was it delivered on time? Did it break down in a week or not? Stuff like that. It's pretty hard to do. So sometimes we see, most of the companies are getting, top marks. But we're kind of testing that out. again, it's after the procurement is over. Maybe technically it looked good, but there's something not being right afterwards. So I think we also need to think of how to look at it, afterwards. Was it worth it? Look at the impact. Did the purchase actually make sense? Did it bring what we wanted to? There's surely a lot of space to do both phases. So I'm very much with Sandor on that.
Colleagues, we are running out of time, so let's take this question. Maybe answer this question. Maybe one more, yeah, we are out of time. Sorry.
Yeah, last remark.
Yeah,
to contribute to what just was mentioned, the problem in public procurement, most of problems are because public procurement is a very complex process with a huge discretion on level of public procurement entity, how to buy, what to buy, how to evaluate, award, and then implement the contract. And having technologies, having data, we should develop our procurement system to limit this discretion. And most of you probably use, I don't know, Alibaba or Amazon to buy some basic things you need. And there you already have like a good specification described, a set of suppliers, so you just click in a button and you have what you need delivered to your house. So that's the future of public procurement as well. Digitalization and standardization of planning and tendering will solve a lot of corruption-related problem in our systems. So now we already have e-catalogs with a standard specification. We are developing dynamic purchases system when we don't have such a discretion like how to describe the good, what we need and how to buy it. So development of this process will limit all these chances for corruption. And then of course we are hearing about these popular categories which I don't like to mention, but artificial intelligence, machine learning, sometimes even Internet of Things in future will be applicable to public procurement, and of course not in the nearest future, but now we already have some concepts how it will work. And the second very important issue also related to technologies is actually civil society engagement. We already see that some countries are including civil society engagement components into design of their procurement system because they understand that actually the end user of everything country is buying is citizen. And what we now see in the concept of, for example, Armenian future public procurement system is that there already should be a feedback mechanism from the civil society incorporated in the system. There already should be a business intelligence to civil society incorporated in the system, and it's a very important trend which we all should support and promote.
Well, I think there's so many things I want to say right now, but I think I have to select it to be very concise. I agree with Sandor. Planning and the assessment, those are critical things that need to be part when we look at the whole procurement process. I have been a procurement monitor for the past, 10 years or so, when even before the procurement law was passed in the Philippines. I have seen how governments have also, or rather corrupt officials can actually change data sets. Like there are specific regulations, right? How many days do you have to do pre-bid, tender a bid, award a contract? And when they get your trust, they actually do it in front of you. And I have seen that so many times happening in front of me. I have been bribed as a civil society monitor. But at the same time, I do believe that technology is important. But then we should also be cautioned by technology. Because what is also important are offline tools, the citizen engagement part of it. How can we make sure that those being identified as priority needs to be contracted, to be procured, are actually the ones needed by the beneficiaries, the end users themselves? All of those are not always captured when you look at data, because you have to have those kinds of trusting relationships, offline platforms that you need to make sure would also complement what you see when you look at data analytics, what you see when you look at OCDS platforms. So for me, I think it should strike a balance. There should be good technology or online platforms, but then you should not also forget the stakeholder engagement, the offline side of things. How do you make sure that the data you get are actually the ones that are validated and needed by the stakeholders or the beneficiaries themselves?
Okay, I will add a few words. Again, I think that there will be two major trends. One, switching from reactive to preventive systems, from red to green. The second one, Viktor also mentioned, and I'm telling this quite a long time, that there will be clear switch from so-called bespoke procurement to standardized procurement. 80% of procurement in volume represents 20% in value, and vice versa. 20% of procurement in value represents 20%, 80% of transactions. So what I'm trying to say, 80% of procurement of low value is a standardized procurement, and it will be definitely standardized. And Amazonization is inevitable. I'm converting this anecdote or whatever, story about property. If you don't go to Amazon, Amazon will come to you. That's inevitable. And in case of standardized goods, there will be catalogization. And that will save a lot of time for procurement officers, I mean competent procurement officers and other parties, to concentrate on the 20% bespoke procurement. Those who are not competent either will be forced to raise their competence, or in fact they are not needed in automated standardized procurement. That's, in my understanding, two major trends that might be observed soon. So again, please, if you have final question, really the important, because we are running time, we're already out, so really short. Yeah.
Well, yes. In Kyrgyzstan, we are trying to create a community of civil observers of public procurement, and maybe this question is for Viktor or Sandor. Is it possible, or it is need to develop toolkit which will provide detailed information about red flags, maybe a detailed description of red flags, also how to monitor of public procurement and so on. And I think it would be very useful for us, our countries, and would help us to make monitoring more professional.
Not to waste time, in the afternoon session in the ballroom number 1, we will have two very interesting sessions. One run by Sandor about red flags, and another run by Anastasia and Christina about community engagement. So those who are interested in the questions you just raised, you are very welcome to ballroom 1 for these two amazing sessions.
Can I just add one very quick one? And if you're also interested in offline monitoring tools, you could actually visit the website of the Affiliated Network for Social Accountability in East Asia and the Pacific, because they have a compendium of procurement monitoring tools. Like, for instance, how would you know if the compaction rate of before a road, before cement is being poured over a road is 90%? Simple as that. I mean, there are things that you can also access from there.
Thanks a lot for very interesting presentations, and thank the audience for engagement and for the interest. I still myself have several dozens questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. And if you will have also questions, please, during the lunchtime and during the day, you can approach panelists. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Tato.